Welcome, Poggers, to another episode of The PogState. I'm Atlus, joined by the entirety of the LCK casting crew, as we're ready to take a look at what the playoffs may have in store for us, as we are already into round 2. Gentlemen, it has been yet another week. Quite a long one at that. However, today is Sunday at time of recording, and there was only 5 games, so we are full of a bit more energy than we would otherwise have. My collar still inside my shirt, mainly because it's a t-shirt, but I've took precautions this time so that my clothing isn't completely ruined. There are a few things to talk about here, because we're about to head towards a new patch. That's going to be coming up a little bit later in the show. We'll go into what we're kind of expecting there. But as of now, we can take stock of how 13.3 with ASOL disabled has been going. And, how these range supports have been going. These 80 carry supports that I think it was Beryl, wasn't it, that started. He was the guy, wasn't he?
So I think it's been a pretty interesting. Patch. We have seen some diversity, right? We've seen a lot of things that have slowly changed. We're seeing like the rise of Nidalee. Lee Sin came back into meta a little bit. We saw mid Gragas. We've seen a lot more flex picks. We're seeing Jace being flexed more often. Jace's priority's gone up. Jax, the rise of Jax on this patch, which has nothing to do with the patch notes specifically, but during our 2 weeks of this patch, right, I've really enjoyed how the meta is evolved. And I think, like everyone else, I'm kind of ready for some melee supports to make it back into the forefront. But I much enjoyed the way that the LCK played these last 2 weeks, especially when you compare it to the start of the season, which was all the same all the time.
Valdes. Say some things.
Sure. Yeah, I can say some things. I don't know. I kind of like this 80 carry support meta.
I think it's fun. It's fun.
Is that kind of like...
I take it back. I regret my decision.
So you wanted me to talk. Here I am.
What have you done? No, actually, I kind of agree with Valdes here.
I really like that Nidalee's in the meta as well. I think that she is a lot of fun, and she's very strong with certain drafts. Although it feels like our teams are still a little bit confused on when to pick her and when to not. When it goes well, it seems pretty fun. I would love to see the rise of real supports again, just because I want to see Zach back in the meta.
What's a real support? Can you define real support?
The ones that are tanky and have
Ones that
CC.
are bigger than Caitlyn.
The one where you press support in solo queue and it shows in the list?
Yeah, that one, I guess.
All right.
That's a start. That's a start.
Like Azir.
Yeah.
I mean, this patch has been relatively fun. I'm a little bit worried about, it feels like a lot of our games, especially at the end of the week, are just like, okay, we picked 5 champions that have a stun, and we're going to layer them, and we're going to kill one person, and then take the Baron and win the game. Like, I think that's not a healthy direction for League of Legends, even though, there have been a lot of patches in the past that have kind of been like this, and then we had the durability update, and it kind of feels like, okay, well, now we're back towards before the durability update. It almost feels like that, even though the numbers aren't quite that, but a little bit worried about that, especially with picks like Annie coming back, Gragas coming back, Sejuani picked every single game. Like, it's kind of just the way things are going. Yeah, so I'm a bit worried about that. Hopefully 13.4 changes some stuff in that direction.
Yeah, I hope so as well. I think we went, in terms of champion diversity, from watching Paint Dry to watching Grass Grow, which is a lot more zen, and there's a little bit more diversity going on. But in terms of overall meta state, actually, not necessarily for the same reasons as Valdes, but I agree. I think the meta is really degenerate right now in that whoever gets the lead early, and if you're not a bad team, you will win the game. Like, the fact that we have double ranged bot lanes trading summoners just so they can get level 2 priority first, so that they can stack their sickle faster, get early plates, then get a better back, which then turns into a first dragon. Like, I don't think the game is in a very good state right now, and it's not even to do with champion diversity, because as much as we mean the the Zeri, Lulu, and the Nami and Lucian, I actually think that we have seen kind of that matchup, as boring as it is, have like so many iterations and go through so many. Our players are very, very favored on Lucian Nami. And then they got tapped, but it wasn't just that, right? It was also players who's getting better at playing it. That part of the patch, I think, is very cool. But the actual meta, like what is happening, what the best way is to play the game right now, I think is very stale. And barring like the odd Fiora carry game, everything is just camp bot lane. Like junglers get no resources. You just camp bot. Whichever bot lane snowballs wins. And I really hope that 13.4 changes that, because that specific meta has been around for like at Worlds we started to see it already, right? Where the Heimer and the Ashe came up, and ever since that was the case, it's been that way.
Yeah, Ashe is just a little bit broken at the moment. I do want to kind of like address the whole Zeri Lucian situation though, because that is much less of a problem now. And I feel like it gets memed as soon as it's picked, right? But it doesn't actually get picked all that often. And we've been in metas, and we haven't complained as much as this when it's been literally only Kai'Sa and Xayah.
Or Aphelios Jinx.
Yeah.
Azir Corki.
Udyr Heimer or Udyr Hecarim.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like there's definitely been there's definitely been far more boring situations when it comes to the bottom lane across every region. Right,
I actually think, on that note, this has been the most diverse AD carry and support meta that has existed since Chronicler and I came to the LCK. Like, we're seeing so many viable supports, not just like, oh, Leona Nautilus, Jinx Aphelios, every game for a year. For a year? Where like you have to lock in the supports early, but it's like which one, who gets which one doesn't matter as much at all back then. I think this is healthier because there's a lot more niche things like, oh, you can play Heimerdinger, but it's strong in this one way, but not in the other. Like, it feels a lot more complex. And it feels like we're seeing the same things over and over and over again. And I think people dislike it because it leads to those one-sided games. If you do win that 2v2, you do get prio, then the game feels so lopsided and unfair and unplayable, which is why we see like 5v5s in the bottom lane at level 1, because you're like, I gotta get that turret in the bush the exact way I want it. It needs to be pushed up so we can get level 2 faster and win this lane.
Mid laner level 1 ganks sometimes.
Yeah.
And stuff.
These things I think people don't enjoy, but I in terms of diversity, I think we have the most diversity we've had in a really long time.
Yeah, apart from there's 2 compositions that we just see all the time, which is like you've got either Zeri Lulu or Lucian Nami. You have Azir, you have Wukong, you have Azir or Victor, you have Wukong or Vi, and then you have Renekton or Gnar in the top lane, and the other team has the other one.
Yeah.
And we see that all the time.
Yeah, that's the main issue, is that we've had metas that were still in individual roles before, but I don't think in a long time we've had a meta that has been as still in terms of like compositionally and in terms of overall champion diversity.
Yeah.
That's the really rough part, because again it ties into every game follows the exact same plan, and if you don't adhere to that plan, or if the draft doesn't work in that plan, then it isn't viable to play.
Yeah, it plays into what you're talking about like the snowball thing being a problem, because if both of your win conditions are the same, it's whoever's closer to that's
That's why we haven't
better.
seen Maokai in like 50 games.
Yeah, right. And that also ties into what Valdes was saying about if you have a form of reliable CC and you just stack that on with a whole lot of conditional CC, a person's dead whenever you press the reliable CC button, and then game's over. And that's a bit sad. That's why I'm glad that we don't see very much Maokai these days.
Remember today with Camille?
Yeah.
Camille, Vi, what was it? Like
Silas.
Camille, Vi, Silas.
No, the worst one
press
was
your R button, and it's like, okay, you're dead if you're ahead. Like,
what was it? No, it
silly.
was Annie, Heimerdinger, Varus,
Also,
someone else, and it was
that
just like
today as well?
Annie presses
in that
Q.
one, I think.
Yeah, Annie presses Q, and then boom, and it was the classic kill Vi win game maneuver.
It's also because of the current support meta, the only people that can walk up are resourceless junglers. So when you do lose map control, like you're just going to keep running into that exact same issue.
Yeah.
Whereas previously, if you got like a Hail Mary engage on the other end with like with Nautilus or Leona, and like you really catch someone off guard, you had like on a combat potential. And now the only way you can have that is if you have Ashe, which
and the thing we used to talk about was like you can't pick range supports or enchanter supports because they can't ward in the late game. Well, now that's all we see picked. And they still can't really ward in the late game, but that's not the conversation we're really having. And what happens when you bring back melee supports is that they can actually do that. You can fight for vision a little bit better in, it has to be relatively close to neutral game state, but like it is more possible to try and find your way back.
Yeah, in an ideal situation, you'd have 80 supports counter enchanters, and then enchanters counter hard engage and hard engage counter AD, because you should not be able to pick Ashe and not get all in and die.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there should be somewhat of a triangle, and right now it's not.
You
Where's
then-
my weapon triangle?
You then factor in things like Umberglaive when it's already difficult to ward, and Umberglaive kills squishy supports really fast and also just deletes the
Spectral
ward.
Sickle.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's on the piece of paper,
Yeah, I wrote it down.
Halo Blades.
Yeah.
Spectral Sickle. Yeah.
And as far as this week in LCK is concerned, we have had a few things going wrong for a few of our teams and a few things going right as well. I want to reflect just for one moment on the week we've had at hand before we go over what to expect from next week. Just because I think coming into this, like, we had a meeting about the PogState, everyone. I think that was closer to the beginning of the week, and we're getting excited, talking about these teams that we think are starting to get some work done. And I used that word on purpose because the KT collapse happened. Live Sandbox as well, looking a little bit shaky, although they do come out with a win from their last match. It was against
Nongshim, right?
Nongshim,
Yeah.
and they were losing until they won. Is kind of how that one looked. So we have a couple of teams in pretty comfortable playoff contention right now that are looking like they're in a little bit of a dicey situation. How are we feeling about let's start with the top four, or the four teams that we have at the top of the standings that are looking pretty good at the moment. How are we feeling about the T1s, the DKs and such?
Yeah, I'd argue that there is a very clear number one, a very clear number two, and then the rest is kind of, who knows?
The 8-4s
Yeah.
of the LCK.
Yeah, because T1 clearly, even though they got dangerously close to losing to Gen G, is I think clearly the best.
Yep.
Both in terms of diversity, as in terms of like how aggressive they play and their overall dominance, their creativity. And then Gen G, even though they've had some matches where they looked shaky, was not only the only one that could almost beat T1, barring Hanwha, which I still don't get, but that's like a separate topic. But the consistency of Gen G overall, I guess, yeah.
Redemption.
Redemption.
Well, no. Clid can always beat
Every-
SKT or T1,
There you go.
no matter what, whether he's on the team or off it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
Redemption.
Could do it either way. And then there's the rest, and I don't want to touch that because that is a topic of its own, because that's actually really cool, like who is going to try and match those two.
And do we think that there is any team in sort of the bottom four of the top six? Is there a better way of saying that? It sounded a little bit convoluted. But
Playoff,
bottom four of the
yeah.
top six.
The middle of the pack.
7
Which
to 10.
one? Which I guess
7 to 10
Okay,
place.
let's do it this way. We'll all take one. We have to advocate for it as best we can.
Nice.
I'm going to start because I've been the one against Live Sandbox the most. I think I should be the one that has to argue for them.
Love it.
To be the team that is going to make it
I should take
to the
KT
top.
in that
Oh,
case.
you're saying the bottom four. Okay, you're
Bottom
saying from
four of
third
the
to
top
six.
six.
From
Third to six.
So the
Middle
A
of the
tier,
pack.
the A, B tier teams. Okay.
Yeah.
Of the pack.
Yeah.
So I get, yeah, okay. So Live Sandbox, how are they going to do it? It's going to be with the power of friendship. The fact that Willa is so good at bigging up all of his teammates in every single game. Yeah, he nice-doos every time, guys. And this is something that you can employ in solo queue as well. Basically, every time anyone does anything good and then gets praised for it, it's kind of like if you've got a pet dog and, they do something and you praise them, then the dog wants to do it again. If your teammate does something good, you say, "Nice job, man," or give them an emote
is
that's
getting
really
cut.
cool.
Give them a treat.
Yeah, you give them a treat.
You'd be a great jungler, man.
Basically, positive influence then
Positive
gets a
reinforcement.
positive
Yeah.
result,
Yeah.
right? It's just how it goes.
This is
And-
why you always.
Science.
I know everyone's got cool emotes, but you always keep a thumbs up on your team
Oh,
wheel.
yeah.
You
Yeah.
always keep a thumbs up on your emote wheel. Somebody does a good play, even if your jungler comes over, he didn't get the kill, but gets a flash. You put that thumbs up out. You emote.
Absolutely.
And it makes the other team get mad, also, which whatever. But positive reinforcement.
Oh, you can make the enemy team mad.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
great.
yeah.
If they tilt, that's really
That's
good.
what I'm saying.
But Yeah, maybe that should get cut. I'm not entirely sure. But I
it's
thought the
fine.
analogy
No,
was.
no, I was just memeing.
Continue about how Sandbox are going to make it.
Yeah,
Is
go
it
on.
just
Yeah.
the power of friendship and Willer?
Well, I mean, I think that Willer is actually a top 3 jungler in the LCK at the moment. I think he's been performing exceptionally well. I think it's mainly due to the fact that a lot of our junglers that we've seen be extraordinarily powerful, I think Peanut sort of comes to mind a little bit here with his recent mistakes that he made this week.
Canyon.
Canyon as well, although a little bit less in their more recent series. But he has been up and down throughout the entire year so far. But Willer has just been pretty good, except like the rest of his team and himself in a few of the moments in the Nongshim series. It was just a little bit of a mess. But I think that judging a team off one series that they have against a team that they probably didn't put a whole lot of prep time into isn't going to be the be-all and end-all. And I think next week is probably when we're going to really want to start keeping an eye on them. I think Willer has just been amazing, and Kyle is a god. The guy is so freaking good. Closer also has had some serious ups. Couldn't play Orianna, but that doesn't really matter too much. Just ban Annie, you'll be fine. That's my argument. I think Bertle is just try to make sure that he's
Bertle.
happy. Try and make sure that he's happy, guys.
Rebut his.
Yeah, because I was about to.
Let's
do it.
Just let me know how convinced you are.
So I do agree. Willer's a top 3 jungler in the LCK. I think he's just below Peanut, personally. I think he's better than Canyon. I think he's better than Clid. Clid's been super inconsistent. Cuz, no argument there. Like, Willer's the stronger player at this moment in time.
What about Juwan,
Birdall.
Sorry. Anyway, continue.
We're talking about the middle of the pack teams. So Birdall is... he's been really inconsistent, right? He's had some high highs and some very low lows and some just very strange moments overall, right? The pressure, the stress, right? This is something that's always affected him. I don't know if I can put Liv Sandbox like in the elite category if he can't fix some of the consistency problems. You guys probably know this from watching my casts of this guy and desks of this guy, because some of the stuff that he has done to the elite level is like, okay, this guy is sick, which is what we all knew, right? This is why the hype was there, you know, back when he debuted with Genji and stuff. But it's been like 2 years now. You know, this is no longer a rookie player. This is no longer he'll get there, don't worry. Like, at some point,
It's the potential conversation.
Yeah, at some point, it's like, how has he not gotten over the stage fear? Like, he's played on stage for so long. He's played internationally, and this has to change, or I think Liv Sandbox will always be held back by this inconsistency that you can't trust your top laner is going to have a good game every day. And that's what worries me about Liv Sandbox. If he can tighten that up, I'm like, yeah, easy call for me. Liv Sandbox is like the team that we put at the top of this list. But Bertle has to find his footings before I can trust.
So I had an idea about how we're going to run this segment mid-segment, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
Now I think that Wolf should make his argument for his team, and then you rebut Wolf, and then
But I
have
had a
your
great
argument.
rebuttal
too.
for your thing.
Yeah, I think we all get a
So
short
it's like,
response.
we'll just
So
do
I
the
was like,
pile on.
yeah,
We'll
I'm
just
just
do the
gonna-
pile on. Okay, yeah, pile on.
So I agree with Wolf, and with the one side note that I do think that Bertle has been getting better on this team because it's a very different atmosphere from what he's seen before. Like, I think the inconsistencies are still there, but I do think that if he spends a year in this team and it's still not gone, I'd be like, okay, it's never going away. But he's been on such high-pressure situations before. I'm also a bit of a known Bertle fan, so maybe I'm just hoping here. But I do think that it's gotten a little better in this current team situation. But I do think that it's their big struggling block that against elite teams, it 100% gets exposed, like we saw with Zeus, who completely
Dismantled
boomed him.
Mm-hmm.
And then besides that, I'm completely with Atlus. I wasn't sure until he mentioned robbed rookie of 2022 Kyle. Then he did, so I'm on board. Yeah.
You know what's pretty interesting? When you listen to comms from Liv Sandbox, we actually had their episode recently on the mic thingy.
Yeah, mic
What is
check,
it?
yep.
Mic check. Kyle is doing like the majority of the calls. It was very nice to see. Like, in the past, we used to think, oh, he's like a new player, you know, rookie of the split. But now he's like, or rookie of the year. But now he's like, all of a sudden, year 2, he's like coming into his own, which is very cool to see.
There's a certain other support that has been doing a bit of that as well, and he's pretty good.
Who's that?
He
Carrier?
starts with K as well.
Kellen?
Kellen, I don't know, and I don't think so.
The one issue I have with Liv Sandbox, and I feel like, you know, speaking about talking about the segment. I don't want this to turn into like a pile-on, and we all get all these negative effects on like why Live Sandbox are not going to make it. So
It's all right. Every team's going to have that.
Yeah.
So
Trust me. Like,
Yeah.
we're all
Keep it-
obviously
keep it
sure
quick.
we're gonna
all
get-
equally okay.
And if can I pile in on myself as well? No,
No, that's not
You can
allowed.
spot on all of us, though.
because I think someone should talk about Envy not being as good as people are making out.
He's
to be
sixth.
This
It's perfectly fine. Middle of the pack 80
I
carry.
think Envy has been stepping it
Oh, I
up
wanna see
recently.
Valdes'
I think
point,
he,
'cause
I
he
think
was
he's gotten
Yeah,
better and
sorry.
better.
Give us
I
Valdes.
think individually these players are pretty good, and the power of friendship to me is actually not quite there. Like I feel like there were times where Closer was individually carrying, Kyle was individually carrying, Willer's obviously individually carrying, but then like I don't know, Bertle's off doing his own thing. Envy was struggling for a while. Now he's kind of in it. And I feel like compared to every other team in this 4, but also in the top 6, like in terms of experience and handling like high pressure scenarios, they would be the team that I would put 6th in that rating, right? Where it's like even the guys on Kiti, I think, can do a better job of handling the pressure of a playoff match. So that's one thing I'm really worried about. for
Yeah,
them.
that's a really good shot. Best of 5s and what could happen with them later on. I think that's absolutely potentially a problem.
and we saw that already, right?
That
trying to
Nongshim
get to
series
Worlds.
also was like, there was that. The Nongshim series we just watched, like, really felt like some lack of decision making. The pressure is on in this series because it's like, I don't want to lose to Nongshim, and everybody freezes and the coordination goes out the window. So I think that's a really good call from Valdes as well.
All right, Wolf. Who do you want to do?
All right, I'm doing Hanwha Life.
right.
I'm taking Hanwha Life
Thanks, Wolf.
Thank you.
One for the team.
Appreciate that.
because Clidemption has been real.
Nice.
But I really want to talk about how the shot calling has changed here substantially for this roster with Clid. Like, he's confident now and the team trusts him, because that has been, I think we heard so many times, like, they don't trust Clid. He's having a really bad season. A lot of people are saying he's the most improved player of the split so far because he had a really horrible, honestly, start to the split. Like, everyone was calling for his head. Now he's looking very good, hence the Clidemption. But Zeka and Kingen clearly not good at calming. They don't communicate. On DRX, seemed like that was probably the case too, right? They had Pioshik, who was very vocal, right? They had Barrel, obviously, so very different team where you don't actually have to be the ones to make decisions. You come into this team and you're like, okay, I got me, you're king, and you're like, I'm World's MVP. I got Zeka, very quiet, and then you have Viper, who's been calming in Chinese and thinking about the game in Chinese. And then if you're Life, you're like, I'm gonna be quiet. Like, these guys are all legends, and then you have to, as Clid, be like, all right, well, this is going to be me. Like, my team needs to trust me. And team trusts him. Now the communication is good. Now the shot calling seems to be making big plays happen in the mid-game. It wasn't just, okay, sit back, Viper will take care of this later. Or, like, I'll sit back, Zeka's got 3 kills on the Sakali. It's going to be fine. Like, we're not going to talk, but he'll get it done. Now they're making proactive plays, so I'm leaning up for them. And I think Viper is clearly the best AD carry in the LCK right now, which is wild because for a long time he's sitting in 6, and for a long time, in the first 2 weeks, he had like the worst laning stats out of any AD carry. That changed quite substantially over the next few matches.
Better than Guma?
I think he's better than Guma, yeah. Individually, his stats...
Better than Deft?
Better than Pays?
I think he is the best.
Better than
most
Envy?
consistent, best performing AD carry, doing damage and losses more than other AD carries, doing more damage on Lucian than other AD carries are doing on Lucian in wins. Like, I think he's the best AD carry. Team plays around him well. Now they're shot calling through the mid game. So for me, I'm like, yeah, Hanwha Life I put at the top of this list based on recent performances and just the development this team has shown.
I actually really like that because it is a great segue into why I think Hanwha, to me, is very lukewarm, which is Viper. If Viper doesn't carry, this team is just mid. Like, they don't have a very strong identity.
But every team in the LCK is mid for half the game,
No,
so it's
well,
fine.
No, it's actually, I really agree. The biggest issue that I have with Hanwha Life is that it's still, like, what is the identity of this team? Because even with Sandbox, who have all their flaws, you can very clearly get a sense of, like, how they want to play the game. To me, it feels like Hanwha Life in drafts are extremely predictable. They will always just go for what we know is kind of good, what is kind
That's
of okay.
generous. I don't think they're predictable.
Okay.
I think they're just not very good
Well,
at
I mean,
drafting.
that's you can explain it however you want, but unless we see individual overperformances from Viper most often, but I think Zeka, even though he's had some very invisible games, has also had a lot of like kind of silent carrying where either he's doing really well in terms of output and in terms of just raw numbers. Even though even on his like trademark picks, I think he's been a little bit more like like Summer Zeka, not World Zeka. World Zeka, we have very rarely seen this split. And then at the inconsistencies, the fact that Kingen has been very also kind of reverted back to just Kingen as we have known him over the last couple of years. I think this team might end up like above Sandbox just because of the individual level of players, but I also think that should not be something that this team will be happy with.
I agree with Wolf because I put Hamalife 4th on my beginning of
Nice.
the year
All right, so
rankings.
I guess my rebuttal. No, okay.
I mean, if I have to rebut,
You don't
You don't have to.
No,
You don't have to.
If you
If you
just
just
say I'm
agree,
awesome,
it's
and I'll be
fine.
like, cool, yeah.
Nice.
no, I'm also a bit worried because Clid in the past, like I even cast him, I think in 2017, 2018. When was he on SKT? Was that 2018?
2019.
2019.
Yeah, that was the too many chefs.
I'm a bit worried. Yeah, I just think that in terms of this communication issue, I think that it might just all fall apart if Clid, falls apart at the seams. Like, who's going to lead this team? It's not going to be Life, and it's not going to be the other three. So, like, if they don't have this guy who's on it, and if he has an off day, I can just see it kind of falling apart. So I'm a little bit worried about that. But as long as he's doing well, maybe they can get it done. To me, Hamalife really feel like a really strong summer team, but spring, they might feel like old Dalmo and Kia, where it's like, I mean, they're good, but they're not like, they're really struggling to find their footing.
like 2022 Domlin.
I know who they are. They're better Breon. It's like if the jungler doesn't do anything, they just sit there for 40 minutes.
Well, I mean,
I don't know about that. That's a bit extreme.
There's a big difference,
similar.
right? It's very similar, but a big difference because it's not their nexus that explodes at the end of that 40 minutes.
Absolutely.
It's the
Oh,
enemy.
I'm not saying they're even remotely as like I'm not saying they're on the same level, but a lot of the tendencies.
I know exactly what you mean because they do play very, very long games. And even though Clid is looking better, they still live and die off him flipping heads. Which, teams have won worlds in the past with a jungler that does exactly that, right? We lost him, and then he's also been removed from the LCS and replaced by some dude called Mark. But
Who's also in the LPL.
it does kind of...
There's a
yeah.
support in the LPL named Mark.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's weird.
It's weird.
Marks are everywhere. They're catching up to us. But what my point was, like, the main thing that I have for Hamalife is that they've taken two solo laners that aren't super vocal, like Wolf said, that were 6th at the end of summer last year, and added the burden of expectation, and now put them on this roster. That's what they've done. And so now to expect anything other than like that sort of result, which is obviously going to be there because they're now world champions in Zeka and Kingen, it feels to me like it's a little bit unfair and a little bit disingenuous, but you can't help but expect the world from the players that just won it.
It just always goes back to Beryl holding the LCK logo, doesn't it?
It does.
Because
It's the prism.
Every time Beryl wins Worlds and then you give him he's taken out of that team, it's like, wait, how does this team work? And like, it's only the two solo laners and Viper who also won a Worlds title, right, with EDG. But like, Beryl's not there, and they're like, okay, who's gonna shot call it? It has to be Clid. And if that trust falters, right, like the team does fall apart. We've seen it. Like,
Yeah.
Hanwha looked like a bottom 3 team for a little while there at the beginning of the season when it wasn't there. The trust wasn't there, but I think that this communication and stuff just always gets better over time, and I agree with Valdes. The summer angle is definitely there, but I also think they could maybe make a run through playoffs, like I was saying. That's why I picked them.
Yeah, fair enough. It was almost like you were about to rebut yourself in the end there, and I thought we were going to spiral. Okay, you're not KT because that's Valdez,
D+.
and so you're D+. Why are they going
This is
to
an
be?
easy one.
That's
It's
an
easy.
easy one.
That's an easy one.
Especially
That's the
after this
easiest
week,
one.
it was gonna be a tough one.
It was gonna
It was
be.
gonna be a
Really
tough
easy.
one.
Well, I'm going to preface this with, we are going to assume that Renekton is not banned in anything that I'm going to say subsequently, because otherwise things do
What
get a
about
little
Fiora?
harder.
Are we okay with Fiora?
No, it's just Renekton. I really,
Okay.
I'm not too, but Thanatos is great. So maybe all things will come to a good end there. The thing with D+ is that individually the players have oscillated like an insane amount, except Deft and Callan. Deft and Callan have just been good the whole time, And I think they will remain good the whole time. Deft in particular has been really impressive, even as this team has looked very lackluster. And with Canyon and Showmaker still being very consistent, Showmaker more so than Canyon, I'd argue. I think Canyon had like 1 or 2 really bad series, but overall has been better this split, where Showmaker has been a little bit more lukewarm, but has had, I think, an overall like lesser performance, like 6 out of 10. Canyon has been an 8, with sometimes peaking down to, or diving down rather, to a 4. The big advantage that as we get into the later stage of the game that this team has to me is that barring T1, they're, I think, are one of the most creative teams. They are able to really rely on their champion pools and their draft ingenuity to an extent that not many other teams are able to. So even if they don't have a great performance, I do think they're very good at allowing themselves to have a draft that is playable generally. The downside, as I shouldn't rebut myself, but I'm going to preemptively put a little bit of caveats.
It's just protection, you know.
You're not allowed to
what
do
you
that.
have to
You're
be.
just...
But no, that's you. If you want a well-structured argument, you also have to preemptively address whichever people are gonna...
okay. So, like, you can
It's
say
a
it as,
thing.
like, if you're thinking
Exactly.
this.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Get ahead of the haters.
Yeah. Exactly. Get ahead of
He's
the
stopping
haters.
us. He's not stopping us. Go on. You can try. You can
The
try.
violence coming. The
See, this is how I get in his head and block
already
it.
getting my head.
You can't remember- you can't remember
The
what he was
funniest
gonna
thing
say.
about this is that they look the best on a Renex and Jay's Nidalee draft, which we've already seen how that one goes. But
It grew back.
it did. And it worked. It worked the second time around. The biggest threat for this team is their own inconsistency. And if they can play to the level that we've seen of them, I think still the most consistently throughout this split, they will be probably our third place team, which is where we kind of had them at the beginning.
Second, yeah.
Yeah, second.
First,
yeah,
yeah.
Oh yeah, we all had. Yeah, nice. we all had, I forgot.
Some of us.
We all had Genji third. Yeah, I forgot about that. And they are clearly finding themselves as we get deeper into the split. I think they had a really big mid-split dip, and things are looking up to a pretty extensive amount now.
Yeah, I'll just say that the second we get into best of fives, I think this team is going to fall apart in spring, because Showmaker looks pretty dunzo at the moment. Like, we've seen so much better from this player. Canyon, I think he can probably turn it on. Like, Canyon's not quite like Showmaker in terms of his mental state. Like, I think he can have a couple of bad days. That's fine. He's generally extremely consistent, but I think the second that Kana begins to get challenged at all,
I didn't mention Kana a lot.
It's gonna happen in game 1 of the first best of 5 they play. If that's in the first stage of playoffs, which it probably will be, I don't think they're gonna get ahead of Genji. Then I think it's gonna happen right away. And like, there's so many other teams that have insane top laners that, like, it's just a gaping hole that I think is going to be an issue. And it's working for now, and they're playing against teams that are really confused in spring, and they don't know what they're doing in the drafts, a la Live Sandbox and KT. But, like, I think the second we get into playoffs and there's a lot more preparation and people really focus, like, I think you can handle some of the picks of Showmaker very easily, and then I think Kana's just going to fall apart.
And just to help you with your point, they lost to Live Sandbox. So it's just... Yeah.
Hamalife Esport. Let's say Hamalife Esport.
Yeah. I think that... I believe that all of these players on this team, on the right day, could beat consistently every team in the LCK. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think that, like, to echo your Showmaker point, he's been in and out of hospital all year. He's said so in interviews, struggling with motivation over and over again. Recently has found a little bit more oomph, which is why we saw D+ actually have a bit of a resurgence in this particular week. I think probably because his position was challenged. Or something like that, right? Pool Bay is just underneath him, and even though he had a rough week on Challenger, he's still a player with a lot of talent and a lot of promise.
Still flanking.
Yeah.
Potential.
Still flanking.
Potential.
Still
And he's
flanking.
probably
He's
still flanking.
right now.
He's flanking us right now.
Yeah. He's obviously flanking my brain. Lucid there as well, and Thanatos. The main thing that I don't want to talk about is the fact that Thanatos is so good. If I'm rebutting, because
That's the
what I think that guy's really good. I'm like really excited about Thanatos. But I think that Canna on a good day, and like we saw his Renekton's unbeatable. Like I don't want to say this like because there is a roof, so I can say I won't get smote. But I think it's better than Morgan's this point in time, especially after today's games.
Yeah.
I think that Canna has looked really good when he's comfortable. But as soon as he's not comfortable, it seems to infect the rest of the team from the top down, or through the mid lane first, then hits the jungle, then the bottom lane's kind of like, oh, what are you doing? You know, like, I think that, like you say, like, Kellen and Deft have been good, but this, as soon as there's one hiccup, one thing that shakes, like, the wheel comes off and the whole boat sinks.
Yeah.
Boats don't have wheels. But you know what I mean?
I mean, some of them use wheels as like bumpers on the sides, so they don't.
Hey,
smash
there you
things.
go.
But
I
if
would
it falls
still
off, it usually
steer
doesn't make it
with the
sink.
wheel.
Yeah.
If you
Like
steer
that.
with the wheel, then the boat starts going in a weird direction, hits an iceberg, and then it sinks.
There
That's
you go.
true.
We were a team. We always
Figure
save
it
the
out,
analogy.
yeah.
All right, let me, I feel like you guys all have similar ideas to me, but I have like much more. I don't know. My worry
He
is
was
like much
burned
darker.
harder than all of
like
us.
I was, and
Whoa.
I think Deft is extremely predictable right now. I'm going to start with him, which is like a weird one to pick because he has looked so good on Lucian, on Draven, right? If
He
has
doesn't play
prio,
Lucian anymore.
yeah, he's not allowed to. Caitlyn, if he has insane prio, he's looked amazing. You put him on weak side, it's done. Like he can't play weak side, which is really weird to say because he has played weak side so incredibly well throughout his career across multiple different metas. But right now, it seems like D+ need him to have prio and just be winning every single lane. When Showmaker has an off day or the draft doesn't go well, he looks really tilted and frustrated and isn't able to actually play out those weaker matchups. Like, look at that game against Bulldog where he's playing the Akali into Lissandra and gets totally wrecked randomly. Like, yeah, it's a tough matchup to play, but you see these moments where if things are not going to plan, like if things are, if you like delete step 2 in the recipe, like they're like, I don't remember what step 2 is, like this is really weird, you know, kind of
Let's
thing.
go back to step 1.
Sorry, I just remembered the free media vote or 2 media votes for Showmaker after that game. I forgot about those.
Yeah.
Never forget.
So
Media KW.
I think the drafts are very predictable. We've seen teams abuse this. We've seen teams just walk straight into it and give Deft the Lucian or the Caitlyn, and I'm like, well, I mean, and when D+ win those games and people are like, oh, D+ is back on form, I'm like, oh, they let Deft have Lucian or Caitlyn again, like, and that's why they wanted. It doesn't really give me any sort of feeling of, oh wow, D+ is back on the horse again. The other concern I have is like, this team seems to, ever since 2020, right, where they won Worlds, right, and it was like, that's the roster, the Ghost Barrel roster, the roster with Nugri, right, with the first time. Ever since that, like, every player that's kind of touched this roster, minus Kellen, who seems to be doing okay, like, you got Birdall, like, it didn't turn out very good for him. Hoya, I don't really count, but he's doing okay.
I mean, 2021 though, like they got one game away from being the world champions
And MSI champions.
And MSI
And what
like,
will happen to
that
the-
roster was so
Yeah. Okay, fair. Okay, Con is fine. I'm thinking really about like 2022.
He retired, Wolf. He's gone.
All right, well, like Birdall didn't slot into this roster. Nuguri came back, went under extreme pressure, and then retired, which was super bizarre, right? Like he took some time off, then he's like, I'm back on Damwon, and then he was like, nah, this is too much. I actually don't want to play anymore. Duck Dom is not having a good time right now. You know, it's a little bit weird. Like, I wonder,
Although, he did have like the flu game where he subs back
Also-
in, gets 2 wins.
Ironically, is that Dogdom now plays with Barrel, and I think Barrel is much more to blame than Dogdom is.
I'm just saying, like, something's going on, it feels like, with this org, where there's, like, this extreme pressure, maybe from somewhere above, like, the head coaching staff. Like, I don't know what's going on, but players are getting burnt out, players are getting tired, players are struggling, players are leaving. And Canyon and Showmaker just remain, right? And they are
that's
the main duo.
That's the only thing that's the same, right? It's Canyon and Showmaker, because it was like the Danny Zephyr era and things like that, and there were lots of like other, like Coach Kim, like back in the day, like.
It just Showmaker has been complaining about burnout though for years, you know, and like,
I think you're right. I think it is like the Showmaker factor that does permeate quite a lot.
There's
and
just
its atmosphere, right?
yeah, there's so much pressure on this roster for some reason, right, that we can't see or quantify. And yeah, you can quantify some of the travel and all the other stuff Showmaker's dealt with over his illustrious career, where he's just been like involved in every international event, and has played 1 million best of fives, and is staying in these countries longer than everybody else, etc. But like, I don't know. I want to see this team build a new roster, like a new dynasty, and they can keep Canyon and Showmaker. That's fine, but I don't want to see Kana be like, I don't want to play with this team, and then leave after this season. And then we see like revolving door of the bottom lane as well. Depth's getting older. Like, eventually, this team needs to figure out its identity, and players really seem to struggle to find that. And it's like, always Canyon's going to be good, always Showmaker's going to be good, but then Showmaker's now struggling. Canyon's been inconsistent these last few seasons. It makes you worry. And that's where I'm at right now. The drafting, predictable. The growth, I feel like we're not seeing any growth. And that's kind of my rebuttal.
I want to say one positive thing. Now that Nidalee and Lee Sin are back in the meta, they look amazing. Because Canyon is just carrying again, which is nice.
Yeah.
And I want
Didn't
to
even think about that.
let's segue that exact thought into the next patch that we're going to be seeing.
We need.
Wait.
Oh,
wait,
talk
hang on.
about
We need.
KT.
Oh, dang!
Did
we
you
have
forget
to
about
talk-
KT again?
You tried to pull it past it. You thought we could get away with talking about KT.
We thought we were not going
Unfortunately,
to remember KT.
It was getting a
Unfortunately-
bit sad, and it wasn't going to get better.
An 04 KT week? We gotta delve into
Unfortunately,
that.
someone
Get the knife out and
has
start
to defend
cutting
this
into it.
team.
All right, Valdes. off
Do
you
it,
go.
Brendan.
And
I
it has
almost
to be me
saved you.
because I sinned, right?
Get me excited for
I
KT.
was the sinner. I was the one.
were.
You guys remember in the beginning, a couple of first PogState episodes, I'm like, man, these guys are washed. I didn't say exactly that, but I was like, I don't know about this roster that, they had. I said it in a nice way, kind of. I was like, BD, he's had a lot of struggles recently. Can he come back? Keen, he was good. Now he's not. I want to start with those two because the solo lanes of KT are insanely good. Like, Keen has had a huge comeback season. He has sort of redefined the way that I think about Jax, which is insane. Because
That is actually.
I was
if
a
you guys
big
don't know Valdes
Jax
that
hater.
much, he hated Jax more than I've ever hated anything. I think.
No,
Is-
probably true.
Jin Karma's there. It was right there.
Oh wait,
Max,
yeah.
but-
You hated Jax as much as I currently hate Jin Karma.
Yeah.
And as much as
Which
I
is an
still
extreme
currently
amount.
hate Swain.
Yeah.
True, yeah. It's a good thing Swain is gone. Because he was basically like, no, this is blind pickable. And I remember so many casts that I was doing or desking, and I'm like, man, they're just blinding Jax here. They're going to get wrecked. And then Keen just like stomps the guy. And I'm like, oh, wait, like what? That's not supposed to happen. So it totally like defied my expectations, not just of Keen as a player, but also defying my expectations of different matchups in the top lane entirely. So I'm like, Keen's in a really awesome spot. I think he's really motivated. He's trying new stuff. He's like learning how to be the best again in certain matchups. So that's really fantastic. BDD, same thing. Like, he had the Nongshim year, he had the COVID year. That, I'm sure he wants to totally forget about that, as do all of us. But he seems to be back. Like, these two guys, these two solo laners are back in action. And I'm like really excited for both of them because they were kind of the crux of my issues with KT's roster, but now they're like part of the reason why I'm so excited about this roster, because they're both performing really, really well. Now, they did have a couple of losses this week, which I think really does come down to a bit of draft woes. It does come down to DK performing really well, at least in that matchup. But what are you going to do? It's spring. Everybody's still experimenting. People don't seem to understand the meta. The drafts are still kind of all over the place, especially for KT. They had to face T1, who basically just threw a dart at a dartboard and won because they can do that against anyone, seemingly. So I don't want to read too much into like losing draft to DK and getting outplayed by a DK that's overperforming, and also T1, who's like, it's T1. So those two guys are great. Everybody else is like very serviceable. I also kind of agree with what Wolf was saying about aiming, where he's like, he could be their franchise player. Like, he's just really solid. He was one of the first people to start pushing alongside of Lehens, like the Ezreal Karma, and saying, hey, this is really good. Like, the Ezreal gets through the lane. All these like pushing weird 80 things can be solved because of the Karma, and then we can eventually scale better. So I think, some of the players have a really good grasp of the meta, like in the bottom lane at least, and then their solo lanes have a lot of potential. Because, to get ahead of, where I haven't
I was going to
mentioned.
say, like, he's lurked in the shadows, hasn't he?
To pull a Chronicler, yeah, I mean, I think that he needs to be more consistent than he has been. Like, when he is on, he's great. When he's not on, it's a little bit of an issue, and he kind of gets carried by the solo lanes. But I think especially with some of the upcoming patches, the jungle's, still going to be just as important. So if he doesn't have his head on right, I worry. But as long as he does, the team, I think, has a pretty bright future for spring.
Yeah, I think the the problem with KT and the problem with all these players has been mental. And it's been mental for... It's so specific to almost all of them, right? Cuz is purely a momentum player. Although you never really see it on his face, you can tell by his play that if he's in a rough headspace, he just doesn't do anything and he loses the game. And he loses the game for whichever team that he's on. He did this on Longzhu back in the day. He had some incredible games, right? Like this was back with BDD in like his heyday, 2017, having the best time ever. And sometimes Cuz just wouldn't be there, you know? He debuts with a quadra kill on Rek'Sai in the bottom lane, and then the next game, like, just straight runs it. Like, Cuz has always been super flippy in that way, but BDD's the same. Like, some days he's just not there. Some days he just doesn't exist. I remember, like, it was a few series back, but he picks Syndra and does nothing, and then they lose the series. And it was one of the saddest series we've cast of KT, and that wasn't even this week, which was actually just abhorrent from the team. I hate to use that word because it's a roughie, but it has been really, really tough for KT. Yeah, strength of schedule, you can argue that. And I think we were upping KT a little bit too much after a win over DRX and Nongshim, which every team in the league...
They had wins before that as well.
No, they did. And they
really
managed to take down Genji and DK prior to that. But the follow-up wins, I think, reinforced us getting excited about it. And that only meant that they crashed way more headlong into the DK T1 problem.
Want to highlight that KT's schedule for the next few matches is Genji, Sandbox, and Hanwha.
Yeah.
And they got to get through that because then you have Bro, Kwangdong, and DRX. And even though DRX looked like a little bit better today, they should all handily dispatch.
You win half of these and you feel good, you know?
Yeah, it's just how far into mental hell do they get after
going into playoffs?
Yeah, going into all those games. And like that's the thing that's really difficult because KT, I think everyone knows that these players, and as Valdes said, he's absolutely correct. On the right day, it's so similar to D+. Like, on the right day, they are the best. On the right day, they also have amazing drafts as well, which is crazy. Like, they play out these Twisted Fate comps so beautifully. They played 1-3-1, the best out of any team that we've seen in the LCK, I think. Like, you can say that objectively previously. But this week, they draft, like, bonobos.
Yeah, that's where my rebuttal was.
And you can say what you want about like how the games were played out because I don't think that they lost so much in draft as they did on the Rift in both of those series against DK and T1. I don't think KT really showed up this week at all. I don't think they existed on the Rift. So it didn't matter. They could have been playing 5 Teemos for all I care.
Well, for me, like, I think that the drafting was so bad that it was really difficult to criticize KT Rolster's play because the drafts were they just didn't give him a chance, you know, and I'm really disappointed in the coaching staff. I don't know who's responsible for some of these picks, as we have a large staff. You got Supreme, you've got Rapid Star, right? And you've got people figuring out different things and obviously trying to improve and diversify, let's say, the way KT is playing. But you're seeing BDD own when he has prio. Like, you put him on the Yone and you're like, oh my god, this guy is insane on Yone. You get aiming playing weak side, he staves off the pressure. On Zeri, he will actually get kills on Lucian Nami. You put him on Lucian Nami, and he just can't do it. Like, he's actually losing lane. He's struggling. He has a really bad win rate on this. I'm like, play to your player's strengths. Don't just put BDD in the mid lane on some weak side carry where you hope he's going to eventually scale up. Like, that's not his strength. You want to have your solo laners fighting, Keen getting advantages, playing around top side. Like, use your strengths. Use Keen's Jax. Play around Keen's Camille, right? Play around Keen's Fjord. Do these things, and use it to buy time for your late game AD carry who's going to do extremely well. Don't play around mid game. That's not what you're good at. You're not good at that at all. Late game, though, 1-3-1s, like Atlus was talking about, absolutely great. Like, play around your strengths. And when I see KT draft losing lanes for BDD or try to put aiming in a lane where he has to carry it or rely on Cuz, which, again, feels very flippy, I get really frustrated because I'm like, I don't get to see these players reach their potential. They're just sitting in lane doing what they're bad at, and then everyone's like, oh, KT sucks. I'm like, no, like, this draft sucks. Okay, these players are insane. And give them the right picks, please.
I think they're not brave enough to blind pick. That's what it feels like to me. Like, you have BDD, like, picking these wacky Syndra angles because he's like, but I'm scared of being hit by a thing that I'm expecting him to do, and that would make me not so good.
I actually think it's the opposite. I also think that Cuz gets more flack than he deserves on this roster because I've seen some of the things that both BDD and Keen do when they're not in matchups that they're winning.
Yeah.
And it's really bad because, like, Keen is hard forcing and it makes them look really good when they're winning. But I actually think that a lot of the problems from KT stem from the fact that if Keen and BDD are not in good matchups, I think that they're horrible. And I think that that's why their drafts... And it's really weird because I don't think Aiming and Lehens are bad at all. I actually agree. I think Aiming has shored up so much of his weaknesses. But
I think Lehens has been playing really well.
It's not about the individual, it's about how the team functions. And to me, this team only looks good when they get counterpick or good matchups that they can win and that they can snowball off and they have prio in for BDD and Keen. And often that doesn't work, and then they're kind of going to go for like somewhat safer picks, and then nothing happens. So... Because we pulled this up in the pre-show yesterday as well. Like, if you look at the win rates when BDD gets, like, a Yone counter pick or an Aurelia or, like, then the team looks cracked.
The sick red side team.
All of his picks that aren't blindable, he's got absolute incredible
TF is another
win
example
rates.
of this, right? Where, like,
KT is the one team that's picking red side.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's
Well,
like
for
they understand that, but they
not-
still...
But they still doing it wrong. They're still doing it wrong.
They still don't quite get it, and that is also why, like with you pointed out with D+, I think KT is the same issue, where as long as you make sure... you can either do the T1 way, where like your solo lanes are going to win because... Well, in the case of Faker BDD, I think it can be more even depending on the day and the matchup, but like Zeus just... as good as Keen is, like Zeus just wins, right? Like Zeus is still probably one of,
Although
if not
Keen
the
looked
best top
better than
laner in-
Bertle this week against Zeus.
True. Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, Bertle and Zeus, I love that matchup for historical reasons, but yeah, it's been hilariously Zeus' favorite since like the beginning, which is why Zeus is playing on T1, not Bertle. But the issues for KT is, I think, going to get worse because teams have kind of figured out that if Keen and BDD don't get good matchups, then they're going to try and force, like, Keen, one really particular example I had, I don't remember which game it was, I think it was against T1, where he, like, they know that owner is on top side, they have confirmation of this.
I remember
They
this.
have full
and
vision.
then he lost the game
and then
in that
he-
one play.
And then he, like, hook shots in trying to get an aggressive trade on Zeus's Gnar, which out of all the Gnars is, like, the best spacing, bar none, and then doesn't have his hook shot and dies. And then that lane is over, right? Like, examples like, and I don't even, that's a mistake by Keen, but I also think that he has to play like that because otherwise the team doesn't work.
Yeah.
So we've rebutted everything. So they all suck.
So they all suck.
They all suck.
Everyone sucks.
Nice. Good
This is
job.
what I was
Tay.
worried
Alright,
about.
so
I'm
So
like,
we're back to being a 2-team region.
Yeah.
We got T1 and
No,
and it's
that's
a
because
two.
we haven't rebutted those crappy.
you know-
No, but it's a two. It's a 2-team
Hey.
MSI.
Yeah. Team still met. Comp Worlds. And then
Yeah.
we'll see
And in
how
Worlds,
good the
that's
LCK
when we're just going to talk about the fifth and sixth team, and then it's
Yeah.
going to be trash. And we're going to lock in our top four, and it's going to be so easy.
No, I mean,
Beautiful. You'll love to see it.
I think these segments are really fun because it showcases that we don't really have an idea as to who is going to end up in like the top four.
Yeah,
Because-
it also shows that we can passionately criticize these guys because we want them to play well.
Yeah.
We're like, oh, why don't they do
any of
this?
us could have picked any of the
any-
teams
yeah.
to big
And
up
we
as
also
well.
made sure,
Yeah.
like, because for me, Live Sandbox is the most difficult because it's the one that makes the least sense for me. But I had absolutely no trouble because you can see why
You can
they're
still
winning
make
their
the
games,
argument,
and
yeah.
you can understand why they are looking so good when they are. And we can always identify what
And-
happens. And if the perfect storm happens for any of these teams, they just get there, right?
They can make deep runs. And the coolest thing to me, like kind of rounding out the spring discussion, is that I also think a spring like this is going to be really good for summer. Because so many of these teams, it feels like they're like
On
one
the
or
cusp.
two clicks away from being... Like, let's not forget that KT, until Vikla came in last spring, sucked.
The Aria era. I'd forgotten.
And then the same can be... Like, Sandbox was a little different.
Prince,
But
Yeah.
yeah, same thing. So I'm not even...
Papa
like,
Smithy.
Yeah. Damn it, Papa.
Then Papa
Whoa.
Smithy came in and we lost those
yeah,
players.
they
Oh,
ruined both of them.
Yeah, very, very short side note. Chasey is like now in the LEC finals, and I know
I
they're
would-
going to look for more They're going to look for more
I've
of a
been
challenger
watching.
players,
I've been
guys.
watching.
Chasey wasn't even that
Peach
good.
is already in the country, guys.
I know.
Oh, no.
Leave him alone.
Poolbay's going to be flanking from Europe.
He's going to be flanking us at Worlds.
Poolbay is actually flanking the LEC right now.
But yeah, I think springs like this, we see this every year, and I feel like I'm glad that we collectively also remember. I feel like we're a little bit more aware of it. This is like what the third year this has happened now. I think summer's going to be amazing. Like, I'm really excited to see what the full form, even for, maybe that's a fun segue, for example, Guangdong. I can see them be good in summer.
Absolutely.
Could happen, maybe.
All right, so that was a little bit depressing, I guess, with the rebuttal tactic. That was a bit on me. I have to say that I'm sorry about that. We are going to go to a happier note here.
Atlas. I thought it was great.
We're going to go to a happier note as we talk about the bottom 4 teams in the LCK.
What?
Yeah, and we're going to do it in a positive way. We're going to talk
Okay.
about what we liked about these teams. And I want to start us off with DRX, because that's easier now than it was before today, which is Sunday. It's easier now than it has been for quite some time, because they did manage to finally pick up a victory.
Fate is so good. I think Fate is insane. He's played so many different champions. He's carried on the Silas. He popped off on the Jace in particular today with the Gore Drinker build. And I was worried for him because he got ahead, and then he had a whip. And we were like, that's not how Jace gets ahead. But then he played the rest of the game so incredibly well. I think his decision-making is great. Duckdom's heartwarming story of just like being like, I'm going to play, like, my elbow hurts. I have this giant cast, but I'm still just going to sit down and I'm going to log
Cyborg
in.
Duckdom was good, man.
It was pretty badass, I'm not going to lie. And he came in and he played well, and suddenly this team, I mean, you win a game like that, your mentality has to change a little bit. I think you have to feel, like, really good. Yeah, it's a weaker opponent, so to speak, but I think you walk away from today's match feeling like, yeah, maybe we could have a chance at summer. Like, maybe this is us finally going the direction we've always wanted to go in.
The bus ride with Croco must have been a bit awkward, though.
I mean, yeah, could be. Juan.
You said
Juan
positive only, Atlas.
Sorry.
I mean, we know from.
It is positive, because Juwan's really good, but that bus ride would
I'm
have
not.
been
I mean,
awkward.
I'm not gonna talk about, as a president of the Crocker fan club, I've not had a great year. Although I did think that him getting subbed out today was
He
an
was the
individual
best performing
performance.
player in game 1.
But
yeah.
Juan definitely did have a great impact. Hooney talked about this as well, trying to kind of break up the team spirit. But Juan is known to be great to work with, because Pioshik has been very vocal
Yeah.
about how much he helped him. And the DRX roster, to me, as long as they get like maybe 1 or 2 more wins, I think their summer will be different. I also think that Beryl, who was by far the most egregious, individually, consistently bad player, has started to play better, because Rasko had horrible games. What was like the 4 solo kills that Brutal got on him? Like the Gragas game today.
Only positive.
Don't worry.
That didn't happen today.
I'm leading into it. So like everyone is at individually underperforming games, but Beryl has been the most, and he looked a lot better. And if Beryl gets his non-gacha gaming together, then I think that this team will probably pick up like another win or maybe 2.
Most recent release in Genshin was terrible, by the way.
There you go.
So I think
That's
yeah,
which
I
someone-
haven't been playing.
So-
I haven't
okay.
done my dailies for 4 days. in a row.
Someone needs to like cross-reference a chart of Genshin releases to Beryl's individual KDA and performance.
Oh, you just asked me.
Well, okay. Well, I don't have the
I'll
stats on
know.
my. Oh, yeah, you will. That makes sense actually. But DRX, I don't think their spring is salvageable, but hopefully with a new mentor and maybe some shifts, we can see them be a decent team in spring or in the summer rather.
Yeah. Kind of looks like Beryl was trying today. That was good.
Yeah.
I think he
Beryl
has been.
existing was
There have been some games where I'm like, yeah. Anyway,
got to
we're
play
not
the
going to
game.
talk about that. He looked
was
great
setting
today.
Up, yeah, he was grenading to set up the Sejuani.
He
It
was
wasn't the
doing
Sejuani
some
setting
good
up a
stuff
grenade.
today.
He was the
Yeah.
grenade to
And
set up the
I really
Sejuani.
like when teams that are not winning start to mix things up, at least after a while, right? Like, you don't want to do it after one loss and say, okay, buddy, you're out, like, we're putting in the sub. But, like, even Duckdom's thing, as I don't want any of our players to get hurt, but, like, it gave Pleta a chance. It gave the players kind of a fresh look, and then Juhan's coming in, and then Duckdom comes back, and it's just I think it's a good changing point now, right? To, like, just go back on the positive side.
Yeah.
I will quickly say something positive. You guys can join in if you want to about Nongshim, because I still love them dearly. If they change some of the individual players, then I think that they could be a good team come come summer. But by good, I mean maybe
How
make
many
playoffs.
individual players? are
I want to say 3.
so basically,
Wow.
it's not Nongshim anymore.
No, that's
Let me
definitely.
say something nice. I hope it's a
trying-
different team.
We're trying.
I'll say something nice. Dundun is great.
I have been pleasantly surprised by Dundun as a player. I think Sylvie, even though he's kind of been struggling more as the weeks have passed, at the start was quite strong. And I think that Vital, given the right support and the right staff around him, could develop into...
That's support as well. So given the right support.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the right support. Yeah.
No.
Then I think...
Not Peter.
Yes, Peter.
No.
Then I do think that this team could grow more than right now, because I think they're hard capped by the individual performances. They're not
Of Fiesta.
well, and Peter. Yeah.
No.
Yes. Yeah.
Fiesta.
Not Peter.
I've never seen someone solo lose a game.
Okay. Well,
much as he
we're
is.
All right,
being,
this
we're
is
being
getting
positive.
cut.
Sorry, yeah,
This
sorry,
is
positive.
getting cut.
So
I actually like the rest of Nongshim. I actually think that
They're a
even
top 10 team in the LCK.
see.
I don't even.
Was
I don't-
this Mal being-
I don't think they are. They were like 5th place in challengers as well. Like I think maybe they're like a 15th place team.
I mean, you only need
boy.
6th, so they're relatively
So
close.
moving on from Nongshim, maybe.
Well, I mean, I think that Nongshim has some really good ideas. I think the strategy is good, right? I think the ideas they're trying to bring into these drafts are good. Like, we have seen some bad drafts, to be fair, but I could criticize KT's drafts and DRX, some of DRX's drafts, some of D+'s drafts even, where I'm like, I expect so much high Hanwha as well, where I expect such a higher quality, and then it's like, wait, what are you guys even thinking? Whereas normally I look at Nongshim and I'm like, how many times have we said this when we're casting them? On paper, this draft is good. With the nameplates off, like this is a good, and I feel like that the strategy is good. The player's experience will come. What I don't want, and I think I literally said this on broadcast, I don't want this team to be like, well, we're 10th place and then 9th or 10th in summer and just get another one, because, well, what's the point? You brought these guys up, you want to develop them. I think Nongshim need to take like a 2 to 3 year L if this is like really going to be the development roster they want, and like be willing to not make playoffs, do the Breon move, and like actually become the Giga Chad team everyone wants to root for as you eventually grow. Because you've already opted into like, I'm not buying the roster. I want to see them stick with this team because the strategy is good, the plan is good, these players are improving, not at the same rate as, say, Kwangdong Freaks, for example, but come summer, I think this team is going to look a lot better. And then hopefully, come 2024, we're talking about this team like, oh, look at the rise of some of these players. Not a rookie anymore. The growth is there, et cetera, et cetera.
Love that.
I think
Feel
it's
good.
difficult though, because if you want a team to stick together and just lose together over and over again, that doesn't make a team improve a lot of the time. No, I'm just saying that like I'm hoping that they do turn it around in summer, because if they don't, I wouldn't want to force them to stay together.
Well, if they don't want to stay together, sure. But like this team played together in Challengers, right? And they seem
Yeah.
like happy together so far. It's not like DRX where afterwards like nobody talks to each other. We had earlier in the season. It doesn't seem like that. Like they lose and Peter's like high fiving people and everyone's smiling like, oh, we'll do better next time.
As long as they keep up that, then totally
that
down.
synergy is some of the hardest.
I think they
to
need
build.
Peter for that.
No,
Just
no,
saying.
they
I
need-
think they
no,
need
they-
Peter for
There's
the
one guy, and that's Dundun. That's all you
No,
need.
No, it's Peter.
I think
Peter's more important.
Sylvie's got some potential.
What about Snowflower?
No, we're talking about.
What?
Bad Wolf.
That
Okay,
did
I'd
happen.
rather
remember
keep
when that
Peter.
happened.
Yeah.
Okay. We have to cut this whole segment.
I don't think it's that. I think it's fun.
So I think we can go to
I-
Kwandong though.
I think Kwangdong have become a little bit worse individually as the season has progressed, and like they're losing and people are getting like kind of feeling like, okay, the season's over. Bulldog in particular to me was a lot better in like week 3-4 than he is now. He's been getting caught a lot more, like playing very careless, playing very
Got to chop
aggressive.
down the log of wood to make a sculpture.
Yeah, well,
you know.
Great analogy. First of all, much more creative than the egg thing. That's,
Thank you.
Been using
What
that
about
one
the
for a little
fish
bit
one?
too
I
much.
like the
fish
fish
one.
one.
Is actually the best, and I'm sad you haven't brought it back. But Kwangdong have a similar issue where I do think that if they don't replace AD Carry, for example, they are going to be kind of hard capped in how much they can grow as far as actually making playoffs and becoming a top-tier team goes. But I do think that in terms of both drafts, both good or bad, but mostly some really high highs. KT comes
It's a
to
classic
mind.
CVMAX situation where
Really
it's like
is.
either they look genius or they look dumb.
And we've had individual insane performances, and I think the fact that they let the individual players shine like that with some Bulldog games, but a Dudu with his like insane Fira plays, it's been really cool.
Ooh, there was this one guy on Reddit that called you out, by the way, for saying that Bulldog was good.
Yeah,
And
I saw that.
I haven't got round to replying.
I actually
and calling
wanted to
him an idiot
reply
yet.
to give I want to give a formal apology.
Yeah,
I'm
please,
sorry.
okay.
Get excited about challenger players when they have a couple of bad weeks in the hardest league in the world. I'm sorry, I shouldn't get excited about it. They're clearly
Yeah.
Bulldog sucks.
No, no,
Now
no.
you're-
No,
now
you need to
you're-
apologize.
Now you're summoning the LPL fans. as
No,
well.
but you should
Jeez,
apologize
Chronicler.
for your opinion prior to this week. So it's not anything about his current performance. It's about you ever saying he was good ever in the past, even after a good performance.
he's a Victor Speed. He
That's what
sucks.
you need to say sorry for, Chronicler. Valdes, do you have any opinions on good old Kwandong?
I think that they're pretty strong individually. I would say that all those players have a lot of individual talent. I think the drafting needs to change. Like today was actually just like unacceptable.
Yeah.
So like you said, maybe that was CV Max just rolling a 1 out of 10 or maybe 100. So again, staying positive. Like I think this team. I think this team has so much individual talent, and if you give them time, they can reach a level where they are at least mixing and matching with Bro, or maybe even getting into 6th. But they need some time. Like this is another roster like Nongshim where you really need to give them at least all of spring to scrim, and then
And that's their mindset, I guess.
yeah, and then in summer maybe they can turn it around because June is great. Taeyun, he's very inconsistent, but when he's on, it's kind of like, with the conversation about BDD and Keen, and I'm not comparing him to that level of play, but I'm saying like some days he's great. Like we had this conversation on the cast today. He's like, great, he's playing really well. Some days it's like, I don't want to talk about this guy
If
at
only
all. So
there was
if he's consistent, and that's one of the things that some of our, inexperienced players try to work with, which, I mean, he did have that season with DRX, which, again, also unspeakable, but, like, give him a couple more...
strong, but it wasn't great.
Yeah, give them it was a lot of losses. So give them time, and I think that these guys could turn it around.
If only very short. If only there was a teamless player that started with T that would be great as an AD carry. Really stable player that could have a really
Ooh,
good
does it end with
real-
Toddy?
Edie?
No, I think it was
Addy.
Taddy.
Titty.
No, I don't think it was that.
That's getting dangerous.
All the vowels. Tiddy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Not in my
Taddy.
accent.
Taddy?
Don't do it in my accent. It's not less good in that one.
So we can cut this part. Yeah, Teddy would be great. Moving on. I think that Kwangdong has come in. CV Max says you could see it when he's playing or drafting, right? And the second the draft is done, especially when they're on blue side and the counter pick comes through, he's like running down from player to player, like whispering in their ear. Almost feels like, even though he's talking in the mic to them directly in the headset, he's like grabbing every shoulder. He's like, watch out for this. I'm like, look at this time and remember what we studied. Like you could just see it, right? He's like, do the plan, do the thing.
You can also see when he's walking to like shake the other coach's hand and do the bow thing, you can see it in his eyes whether he thinks that he's done a good job as well. And
Oh,
there
you
are
can
some-
know. You
there
can
are
know.
some walk-offs from CV Max where he's just like,
You can know, but the game plan has always been good. And then Kwangdong is the team to me that loses leads more than any other team. You could call it throwing, whatever. But it's really hard to train this where if you are, especially scrimming LCK teams almost exclusively, excuse me, and then playing in the LCK and very rarely getting those leads, it's hard to then when you like actually execute the plan well and you're 2,000 gold up, be like, oh, what happens now? Like, because I feel like in a lot of ways that's kind of been the problem for Kwangdong in a lot of these games. Sure,
Nongshim as well.
yeah, no, definitely.
the Tristana game where Bulldog is able to just like leapfrog over the map and kill everyone, yeah, you could snowball that game. But if it gets a little bit more complex, if the subtleties of your lead are a little bit harder to find, or in today's game where your Ezreal is ahead, but you don't know how to actually deal with the pressure and you keep overextending, pushing mid tower and getting caught by the Vi, stuff like that, they need to like drill or maybe even scrim against challengers teams, like weaker teams, like how do we push our leads? How do we push these advantages? Because the early game is good. Like the plan is good. Sometimes the draft, we're like, it could be good, but it's going to be hard to execute this. But when they have a good draft and the early game is good, like what happens next is I think what they need to solve. But that's something, again, that's fairly easy to teach if you just run the drills, like if you scrim against some weaker teams.
Yeah, it's like that textbook that we talk about when a team is winning a game in the end, right?
The like consistency when Kwangdong and Nongshim have looked good is when they're snowballing early game or when teams take them on for 5v5 team fights in their comfort zone.
Yeah.
And outside of that, like Nongshim much more so, but Kwangdong as well, you can just see that when the map opens up, it gets so much harder against LCK teams because defensively they're so much stronger.
Well, now there is one team left to talk about, and we saved the best till last, everyone. Our Lord and Savior towards the top side of the map, good old Morgan. So it's Bro. We need to talk about Bro. Bro would have been easier. There's a PSA that we have to go with, and let's hold it together. It's the last. We're in the final stretch, guys. It's going to be fine. So this was going to be fine if they managed to beat DRX. In their final match of this week.
They really needed to. They did not.
They didn't, because that would have meant 5-7, and we could have had a big conversation about how Bro are still able to make it to playoffs.
We've been pulling out magic numbers, like who has to lose. And
also we're saying that, well, they don't have to beat T1, but they can just make sure that they steal this game from this team right here, and then it doesn't matter if they get smashed by this team.
From now on is 5 strong teams.
They face Nongshim for their last game.
So, yeah, it's rough.
And Nongshim is scaling.
I think that
they might be stronger by then.
Yeah. Weirdly,
might be. I mean, no joke. Like, they've got all this time to continue to improve.
I mean, what's coming out of the pinata this time from Fiesta? You know,
Yeah.
like I don't know.
These are really good games.
If I can
That one time, yeah.
if I can talk a positive thing about Bro, I know
Do it.
I know I'm in the minority here.
Praise Umpty, yes.
I feel like it's weird because I feel like almost our opinions about Bro are somewhat outdated. Where it's like, oh, Umpty's got to get this early lead and get them ahead, because it's almost like Bro are weirdly changing their style. Where it's like, now that Henna's strong, we just don't play around the bot lane and get him fed. Like, he gets fed individually and in the 2v2, but, like, Umpty doesn't go there. And, like, that's so weird because that's the entire meta. It's almost like they don't have an understanding of the meta. So, like, individually, some of these players are playing really well. Like, Umpty's, I think he's kind of had a weaker season, but he's still, like, serviceable. And their bottom lane is awesome. Like, Henna had some really great moments today alongside of Effort, who is also playing decent. And then you've got the top lane. Kars is kind of, I'm not too hype on him right now, but like Morgan's playing pretty well. Like, I don't know, it feels like some of their players are playing really well. Like, I'm really impressed by Henna and some of the picks that he gets. He's able to carry really well, but like, it almost feels like he's doing it alone and nobody's helping to get him ahead. It's like they're not playing to their strengths. Like, if only they could switch it like back a couple of clicks and then forward like 5 clicks, then maybe they could get something going, but
he has
I don't know.
Bro safe code. He knows the combination. How many clicks to unlock Bro Valdes?
Oh, no.
How many clicks forward and then how many clicks back?
And what's inside that Pandora's box, Valdes?
It's playoffs. Yeah.
I think it's really difficult with how I think Umpty has been playing really, really scared. I feel like Umpty is feeling a lot of pressure at the moment. I think he has the entire team on his shoulders at this point in time. At least, like, that's how he comes off, right? Like,
but like, he doesn't have to feel that way. Like, Henna's carrying the whole team.
He's all
like,
exactly.
Just feed Henna.
Yeah. And you don't even need to feed Henna. Just leave him alone and don't screw up.
Imagine if they actually played towards the bottom side, like how much he could carry then.
I think
if they push their leads, like,
this team has a fear. Like, you could feel it in its older players, right? Like Morgan, Umpty, Henna. This fear that, like, we've peaked, right? To me, when I watch them play, like, they'll be playing these long games where they think they're, like, really ahead. It's like 28 minutes, and then suddenly, like, Umpty starts talking a lot. Have you guys noticed sometimes Umpty just starts, like, yelling and just talking, like, an insane amount? And you watch on his player cam, his mouth is just always moving 1,000,000 miles an hour. I feel like there's, especially in today's game and today's series against DRX, like, suddenly Umpty is just like, we need to be more aggressive. Like, we need to be more proactive. We're not doing anything. And then suddenly they just, like, push for something and it either works or they lose. Like, it's crazy. And it doesn't always have to happen on Elder. It does often happen on Elder. But the same way that, like, Delight got out of this squad and is now doing incredibly well, like, I could see 2024 like Genji Hannah. I mean, he's not going to replace Pays, but you know what I mean. Like maybe if Def
He
retires,
woke up the bro ante, by the way. He was powered down.
I'm being a bit facetious, right? But
No,
like
it's fine.
Hannah's done extremely well this season, but he isn't empowered by this team that is overall just playing extremely passively. Morgan as well is like outgrown this team, I think.
I think Morgan
That's a positive.
is very strong individually as a player, but I think he's kind of suffering what Wolf is talking about, where there's this fear, like Huni was like exasperated. He's like, literally just push your Fiora, you're fed. Do something, like push, please. It's like nobody can move on this team. They're all like wearing the training weights, like they can't move. And they can't do things on the
They're
map
not being
they're all
set free,
scared.
you know?
They're all
It's-
scared,
it's
including
weird.
Morgan.
They're doves in a cage.
Yeah,
And Dove did get set free.
I just
and look
had,
at what
I
he's
just had a
doing now.
realization, which is like the same reason why I don't like Bro as much as I think they deserve, because I actually
known bro anti.
known Bro anti.
It's
Because
known.
actually, you're 100% right about how much better Hannah's gone. It's the same reason why I love Sandbox more than they should, and it's because as much Sandbox, not this iteration, not so much, but like last year had an issue with doing too much. I think Brion needs to get over themselves and do just. I'd rather see a game where Brion like gets a lead and throws it, because they need to change how they play the game. They've been the same team for like 2.5 to 3 years now. They made playoff once, and even then it felt like they were much more preying on the weaker teams, and then they were like just able to scoot by. I love because the peaks that this team might reach when they're like when Morgan is like, okay, I got 2 kills, I'm gonna just keep sprinting top lane. Or when Hannah gets a double, and they're like, it's a philosophical thing for me, where they feel like even when they do get the lead, they're just like, we can take the 90% road, or we can take the 70% road, and then win many more games.
Yeah,
but they never
90%
do.
to get an incremental lead, 70% to win the game right
Yes.
now. You
My
know?
problem is that like I think that they do that. They do like they get a lead and then they send it and instantly they give the lead back, right? Like we saw this today in the
This is
series.
what I'm talking about. Where
It's
like
precisely it.
they reach a breaking point oftentimes recently, not at the beginning of the season, but recently they reach this breaking point where like I said, Umpties starts like yelling and talking really fast, and then like they're like, we're gonna make an aggressive play now, and then like it either works or it doesn't. Whereas in the past they wouldn't ever make it, and they'd be like, all right, here we go, like Smite's at the ready, we're going to L, there's 7 Drakes in this game. But this team just it's frustrating to watch because they aren't improving, they aren't growing. And then we talked to the Brion coaching staff quite a bit over the last few years. We've seen their interviews, right? The coaching staff always do these little comments about why they thought they lost or what they're focusing on. And they always say, like, oh, we made, like, these few mistakes. And every time I read that, it gets me a little bit agitated because I'm like, your whole entire playstyle is to avoid mistakes. And then you're like, oh, we would have won if we didn't make mistakes. You would have won if you just actually took risks and were willing to make mistakes and actually willing to make proactive plays. Like, you did not lose because you made a mistake. You weren't willing to even see the mistakes.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
I had an epiphany just now.
A lot of epiphanies. Me too, just now.
Yeah,
That's great.
We're epiphanizing.
Yeah.
I think it's
I
an
didn't.
epiphany
What?
circle.
I'm okay. I didn't come up with anything.
yeah.
But
My-
enlighten me.
I think it's that, bro. They don't have anyone that understands what the game state is at any one time. They just don't know.
That's not a happy, positive thought.
No, it's
So
not.
savage.
Sorry, I'm kind of
Alright,
like
continue.
Continue, yeah.
So what it seems like to me is all of this avoiding mistakes, all of it stems from never knowing when to make the positive move, right? And we saw this today. What they wanted to do was unleash and actually start making moves. Because in the laning phase, they're fine. Because laning phase, everyone knows how to do that, right? There's no like right or wrong. It's just hands, do stuff, coordinate your bottom lane, 1v1s, blah, 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 and have an early jungle path that you can plan out. That's always plannable, right? You can always, you just run drills of early games. That's totally fine. The early game, often really good for bro. But it's after that. It's about their understanding of where game states are, where junglers are going to be, predicting what the enemy team's going to do, understanding tendencies of your opposition, all these sorts of things. It feels like bro doesn't know. Like they fall off and their understanding just isn't there.
A 2,000 gold lead at 17 minutes versus a 2,000 gold lead at 38 minutes, the difference is pretty massive.
Yeah, and the problem is that like what they do to address this is to try not to show everyone that they have no idea. And they're like, well, we'll just put some words down and just try not to die.
And I think this is where Morgan excels because he's like, well, I'll win the game, though, if you guys don't know what's going on.
Well, I mean, for Morgan, the laning phase just keeps going.
He learns how to win. He knows how to win. The rest of the team
He
doesn't.
saw the finish line. He's like, it's over there. It's ARAM.
I need to get through these turrets and kill the Nexus. And I think that actually what Bro are doing is they're kind of overcomplicating it for themselves and then starting to, like, it's all this negative energy where it's like, oh, it's too hard to understand exactly where they're going to be all the time.
Analysis paralysis?
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. Analysis paralysis.
You never heard that before?
No, I haven't. Oh, is that a thing?
It's a thing.
Oh, sorry.
It's like they're trying to figure it out, and they don't want to make these few mistakes that maybe the coach is harping on. That's just, what do they call it? Basically, I'm like guessing at something that I don't actually know, but like I'm not saying that he's doing this or harping on these mistakes, but like maybe if he is, then these players are like, oh crap, I don't want to do this again. Where like I overextended and like,
that's what I'm kind of
oh
getting
man.
at, right?
Whereas the whole mindset should be totally like looked at it entirely different. Like you shouldn't have even been there because that's not what you're supposed to do at this point in the game.
I just
should have
don't
been
like- we
pushing
don't
bot.
know.
Like
And it's also them trying to understand like where to react on the map instead of saying like what we should be focusing on doing now is getting vision here. And then you just think about there and then that analysis paralysis doesn't happen because you have a subject that, well, if we want to take this, what do we do, guys? Oh, well, let's get some vision here so that we can do this and check our flanks and then take the dragon. Because we're stronger, because we have these items and blah, blah, blah. Like the things that they have on hand and they can focus on that. But if you're just like, all right, well, what are they going to do? They could be attacking here, and doing all this sort of stuff, and then they overwhelm themselves. That's what it feels like.
As Wolf was saying, the coaching stuff thing is really interesting because Sandbox and Bro have been like diametrically opposed teams, regardless of lineup, for like the last, Sandbox has been 5 years? Breon has been like 3 years. And despite lineup changes, they've just remained effectively the same team.
Yeah, it's wild to see. Like, it almost feels like the mindset and the training is like, don't mess this up. And I think that's a really unhealthy mindset to have. I think if you are Sandbox, like maybe a spoonful of that, right? Like sometimes, like the old Sandbox. Maybe you need a spoonful.
Just
of
a
that.
little bit.
But if you're Breon, you need some of that spicy stuff, right? You need
some of that T1 energy.
Yeah, you need
Yeah.
some of that.
We're just gonna pick
Let's
this
do
random
Baron
thing
right
and
now.
like,
Yeah,
we're just gonna do it. We're just gonna send it.
Or
Like
let's
we have
call-
so much confidence that it doesn't matter the champion.
Yeah.
I will look at them from across LOL Park and they will
That's
die.
what
and give
T1
me
does, and
300
that's how they
gold.
lose to Notion sometimes.
Yeah.
Because
They
they're like,
don't
yeah,
have-
we can probably dive their turrets 8,000 gold ahead,
Yeah.
and no problem, and then they
They don't have lava
too
anymore.
far.
They don't have delight anymore, right? But like this roster is still in most parts the same, right? And you would think that with the synergy that's built up and how good, or at least how vocal Umpty is, I can't speak always to how good his shot calling is, especially based on what we've seen and what we're talking about at hand here. But you would think that with how much synergy most of these players have together, and now through over half a season, they've built up the pieces of the two replacements, Effort and Karis here, that they'd be willing to do that 20-minute Baron when they're 4,000 gold ahead and be willing to then shot call the turn and how they're going to team fight it and the vision that comes along with it. And I kind of want to smash this roster and just start over, like personally, because I think these players are afraid they've peaked, and I am also like I think this roster has peaked. That's kind of where I'm at.
I like them.
I like them,
I like Nongshim.
but I want them to be better than they are. Maybe they're going to do better in other places than being on this roster together.
I like KT's challenger team.
They're good. I like D Plus's challenger team.
Just
as well.
talking about teams that we like.
I like
you know?
Harmon Life Esports, a challenger team.
They're good as well.
I think Lure is really good. We're just talking about things that we like now. I think we can do that off
very
camera.
positive, yeah.
I think it's time for us to end this episode. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Every time we get to sit down and share our thoughts with you guys, it just makes us a little bit happier. One iota at a time. I hope that we didn't harp on about Bro too much in a negative light. It is still absolutely correct to Giga Chat every time. If you lose all your channel points to Bro, just know that they're going to a much better place if you do lose them. If you get your points back, then good for you. Congrats on the win. But that is going to do it for us for tonight. We'll see you in a couple of weeks' time for another playoffs-focused episode of the PogState. For now, good night.